We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.
Go on without me. Just go.
A good soldier never leaves a man behind.
Because I wouldn't give you 2 cents for all your fancy rules if behind them they didn't have a little bit of plain, ordinary, everyday kindness.
Life, finds a way.
Hey, welcome to Silver Screen Biases, where we dig into a critically acclaimed movie and evaluate the truth claims within it. I'm Nelson.
This is Jeff.
This week,
Into the Wild.
Into the Wild, one of my all-time favorite movies. Who directed it? When did it come out?
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Release date 2007. It is a period piece about a gentleman named Christopher. From back, he was born.
Christopher McCandless.
He was born in '68, and the movie goes in his journey while living in the wilderness in the early '90s, leading up to the end of the movie, which we'll get to. Yeah, released in 2007, directed by Sean Penn
of Milk and I Am Sam fame.
Yes. I don't know if I've ever, not to my knowledge, I've never seen anything he's directed before, but that could be just because I didn't know he directed it. But,
I remember watching I Am Sam within the year it had come out.
Okay.
And arguably I was too young to watch it. But I remember watching that and being really impressed with it. But I also remember on Tropic Thunder where they made fun of him for selling it too hard. Mm-hmm. Right? Being a neurotypical person playing somebody with a mental handicap of some sort, that's some dangerous ground to tread.
Right. Just looking at Sean Penn's stats here. He directed a movie in '91 called Indian Runner. He directed a music video for Shania Twain in '93.
So when Christopher McCandless is super tramping it up, he's directing for Shania Twain.
Yeah. A Jewel music video, a Bruce Springsteen music video in 2000.
It is surprising how many all-star directors have directed a bunch of music videos or live concerts and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Like Scorsese's done a bunch.
Peter Gabriel stuff, Bruce Springsteen again, and then Into the Wild 2007. And then actually there was 9 years in. After Into the Wild, there was a 9-year gap between that and his next directorial project. So
was this his first film?
No. Okay. Going down back to those. Let me click on this one here. This one's called The Indian Runner, 1991. It is a movie, rated R, not on the top 250. So we won't. A Vietnam vet comes home to his small town and finds himself a conflict with rules that his brother has vowed to uphold. So it's like a different from a Rambo. Yeah. So Sean Penn's first directorial debut was in 1991.
Okay. Yeah, so this came out in 2007. I would have seen it for my first time shortly after, and I watched it probably about a dozen times through high school.
Yeah.
And even though it's one of my all-time favorites, it's probably been 10 years since I saw it last.
Okay. So I graduated high school in 2008, and I don't think I ever knew this movie existed until we started doing this podcast.
Yeah.
And looking back at where I was in 2007, being, right in the height of my high school career, like my big high school years.
Yeah.
I feel like, because I was very, as a youth, I was very much impacted by media, whether music or on screen. Like it was something that I consumed and I enjoyed consuming. It wasn't just like I was influenced by, I enjoyed movies, I enjoyed entertainment. And I feel like this movie would have impacted me positively in the way that I would have, this may get deeper into our conversation later, but in the way that I pursued my adulthood or how I looked at what it means to move on past the academic part of a young youth's life,
Yeah.
Like this movie would have been impactful to me if I would have saw it when it came out.
This movie
Absolutely.
Almost certainly had a massive impact on me. And really was very influential for me in my my adolescent, young adult formative years. The way the movie hit me most recently watching it is very different.
Okay.
And I really we'll get to that once we start talking about the truth claims in the movie, but it was really interesting for me seeing how differently I interpreted the same movie. So, do you have any production notes for us?
Honestly, production notes are minimal. It was the Alaskan scenes were filmed over multiple months just because of specific.
Because Alaska's a difficult place to be.
Right, and they wanted almost like this movie. There was a lot of moments. Have you ever seen The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio?
No, but I've heard great things.
Like I didn't like that one, which I imagine we'll probably get into eventually. That movie will probably come up again. Yeah. But this one reminded me a lot of it because it's literally just about one guy in the woods in a self-discovery type of journey.
Yeah.
And lots of comparisons. I don't know if The Revenant's based on a true story, but I know this is.
Yes.
So,
this is set,
but production-wise, there was a lot of the same things where like they filmed a lot of scenes over and over again until they could get that direct, specific emotion they were trying to go. And I appreciate that. Like, I didn't lean too much into like what was going on in history at the time, just because like this movie wasn't written fiction. Like it's not a fictional piece of work. Like, so there wasn't much that went into the production that was. They weren't taking liberties with this movie. A lot of this movie
take a few liberties.
Okay, so you may know some things that I don't. Then
yeah.
Okay.
So because I read the book John Krakauer wrote, Into the Wild. I don't recommend reading it. I think the movie does a better justice of telling Christopher McCandless's story.
Is there pieces missing from the movie that's in the book?
Not so much that. John Krakauer spends extensive parts of the book talking about his own experience and how he relates to the character of Christopher McCandless. And just from a reader's point of view, you're here to hear Christopher McCandless's story. You don't really want to hear about John Krakauer hotboxing a tent. Not what I came here for.
Right.
So I think the movie does it better because it keeps it contained, keeps it focused.
Okay.
A liberty that both the book and the movie take is in detailing how Christopher McCandless dies. So we don't actually know how he died.
No, it's up in the air.
Which is really interesting you'd say that because that's one of other John Krakauer's books is Up in the Air.
I definitely had that planned, Nelson. So spoiler alert, I'm hoping, and let us know as we do this and as we're getting more up on our social medias, let us know if you're watching along with us or you watch before you listen to the podcast. Let us know how you interact with this podcast.
Some people have reached out to me like, hey, I was in the middle of an episode and I had to pause and go and watch the movie because I realized I'd never seen it.
And this is just for listeners' insight. This is the first podcast we're recording after being live on the air.
Yeah, we had a bunch in the can ahead of time. Yep. And probably way more than we needed.
Right. Honestly. So we're learning as we go, but this is exciting. We're now coming back from a little bit of feedback and we're evolving and stuff. So it's awesome. So yeah, production notes. All I just know is like there was a lot of detail put into filming locations and stuff. And they were originally going to film at the original bus. Yeah. They were going to use the original bus, the magic bus. Yeah. But they decided for respect of the family and for Christopher that they were not they wouldn't. So they recreated the scene like down to the paint job and in the attire and stuff. So they recreated it, but it was not the same.
And they include a picture at the end of the movie of him in front of the bus.
He took a personal selfie somehow. Yeah.
He took a self-portrait that was undeveloped and they found it on the camera.
Yep.
The actual magic bus became a mecca of sorts for people who have romanticized his story.
Right.
And the movie really romanticizes his story
It does.
well.
It does.
And
2020.
Almost like a half dozen people have died trying to get to this bus. And so the Alaskan Air Force, is that right?
Yeah. They
airlifted it out.
In 2020, they just fairly recently, they airlifted it out. And I don't know what they did with it. I'm assuming.
No, they've announced that it has a new home at an Alaska outdoor museum.
Okay, so it is people can still venture to it and see
in a safe
it. Okay.
environment.
Yeah, not kill themselves. But yeah, but yeah, so that was one of the other big things too. Just fairly recently that the bus has been there the whole time up until just two some years.
And that bus got there in the 70s.
Right.
So like that bus had been there 20 years when he found it.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's pretty much all I had for the history and the production info and stuff. I do have a lot more for this one. I think I came more prepared with the bias end of things than I did the production side of things.
Okay.
So I've got more stuff going into the.
I
other
know
aspects,
a handful of production stuff just because it's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
I just kind of squirreled away a bunch of knowledge about it.
I will say, but before just kind of staying off on the loose topic here, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I would say this movie, and I'll sum it up again at the end like we normally do, but just Just between likes and dislikes, I don't think I had a dislike. The soundtrack, Eddie Vedder,
Pearl Jam.
like incredible. I mean, like
Recorded 25 minutes of just like samples and gave it to Sean Penn. He's like, I don't know if you can use any of this, but if you can. And actually, there's a song there that you probably recognize that was like he won a Grammy for. And that the soundtrack for this movie it's
phenomenal. It's incredible. And Eddie Vedder signed on to the film before he even knew what it was about.
Oh, really?
Sean Penn came up to him in one of the articles I was reading. Sean Penn came up to him and said, "Hey, I got a movie for you." He's like, "I'm in." Essentially, before he was even given any of the details, Eddie committed to it. So, probably my favorite Kristen Stewart movie. I mean, she's a very minor role, but I of all the cast members, I'm like, Kristen Stewart's a wet noodle.
I don't think
respectfully,
I don't think a single cast member in this movie doesn't live up.
No,
they all nail their performances, and these are real people they're based on, but they're characters, right? Like these are interesting, different people, and they feel very real,
right? Zach Galifianakis.
Is that Zach Galifianakis?
Zach Galifianakis was the tobacco chewing guy up in the middle. It sounded
like him, and Jen says to me, "Is that Zach Galifianakis?"
Yep. When Vince Vaughn was getting arrested, he was up there with.
He's also the one that tells him he tells him how to clean big game.
Yep.
Rainey.
Okay, which one was that?
Rainey and Jan are the Rubber Tramps.
The hippies. Yeah. Yep.
Rainey had never acted before.
Really?
He had signed on to this film to be a whitewater rafting guide for when they did the kayaking scenes, and just kind of like fell backwards into it. And he, in my opinion, is one of the strongest parts of the film.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's the strongest because I don't know if there was a weakest part in the film. I was emotionally all these little story segments of him with Mr. Franz, him with the Rubber Tramps, him with Kristen Stewart's character, and even the interaction with his parents. None of the moments I felt was they all felt authentic.
Yeah,
and I was genuinely into those dialogues from the moment they were on the screen. I don't know if it's because of the production or if it's just because I was so hyped to watch this movie after watching the 4 previous ones. Yeah. So I was the perfect storm for me to just, I don't have any dislikes. This movie isn't it didn't become my number one favorite movie. It is up there for me. I'll sum it up again at the end. Mm-hmm. But I don't have many qualms with it. I didn't read the book, so there's not, I wasn't coming in with, I didn't know much about this. I didn't know anything about this story coming into it. So
I do have one dislike, and I'm going to come back to that at the end.
Okay.
I have one dislike. It's a directorial choice, and the reason I dislike it is because of how I interpreted the movie differently as a youth than I do now.
Okay. So this is a fresh dislike for you. It's a newly discovered dislike, or did you just
it's a newly discovered dislike.
I got you. And you're going to talk about later?
We'll talk about that later when we get to it. And then the budget of this was $15 million.
Holy cow.
$15,000,2007. And if we move that to $2022, $21.5 million. Two things here. One, $15 million spent on this because of all those constant reshoots to get the perfect shot.
Months and months of.
Yeah. And then the other lesson to be taken out of that is in less than 20 years, that's how much we've devalued the dollar. And I will always, always, always take time to talk about the sin of inflation.
Absolutely. One other thing too. The Rotten Tomatoes is 83% tomatoes, so it's a full batch of tomatoes.
That's the critic score?
And 89 is the critics.
Oh, okay.
No. 83 is critics, 89 is audience.
Okay.
So that's Rotten Tomatoes.
How do you feel about those scores?
Honestly, I think they're low.
Yeah, I'd give them higher.
And on the IMDb 250, as of today, it is ranked 222 on IMDb.
Okay.
That's really low.
Yeah, but
for
sure, but
the
also
fifth movie that I've really enjoyed,
that's of all movies.
Right. But that's below Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
And I just don't get it. We don't have to keep coming back to Clockwork Orange.
I feel like I'm the one that never get away from that movie.
No.
It has a way,
but
it has a way of burrowing into your conscience.
But not in a positive way though. Like I feel like this movie, there's a hope in this movie, even though that like it doesn't end well for the main character.
Yep.
Like there's a hope in this movie that like you're rooting for him. You're wanting him to have this big self-discovery achievement. Like just you're wanting him to
You're
meet.
rooting for him.
Yeah, you're every time he interacts with a new couple or a new person or a new character, like you're like, oh man, he's becoming so wise. Like he's learning so much from this person. And he goes like just like.
There's never a point in the movie where you don't either empathize or
Right.
cheer for him.
Right.
At no point are you like, you shouldn't do that.
Well, except for the jumping into the river when it was moving really fast, but
But even then, I'm like, I get it. Right?
Yeah.
Like I want.
so
Yeah.
I think after we do this a couple more episodes and stuff, maybe I'll give my every 10 episodes ranking of the last 10
Okay.
movies. But like, I'm really bummed this is as low as it is on the top 250.
Well, let's do every 5. Let's do every 5 because we're on our 5th episode,
Okay.
and you've been keeping track and ranking them yourself.
Yeah.
And
It's
this
true.
is your favorite of the 5.
Of the
so
5.
far.
Of the 5. This is my top 5. This is my top number 1 of the 5.
And
we've
what's
watched
your
so
number
far.
2?
Let me bring the list up. Psycho.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And then 3rd,
Exorcist.
4th,
Alien.
Clockwork Orange is last.
Absolutely.
I would put Clockwork Orange 3rd right now.
Okay.
But then the rest
What
of
would be your last one?
Exorcist.
Exorcist.
I
Okay.
didn't really
So
enjoy
just you'd switch those two.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Alien was just boring.
Yeah.
Like Alien, I was not entertained at all. Anyways, okay, moving on.
Also, what's his name? I have it written down here. Let's see.
Bum, ba-dum, bum. Survey says
He does not. So when he's at the slabs, Kristen Stewart takes him out on a date, right? Remember that?
they
They go to Salvation Mountain,
right, and the guy's talking to them about Jesus.
Mhm.
Yep.
and I can't find his name. I have it in my notes, I thought.
Okay.
And it's important to me that I have his name because that guy is a real guy.
Well, okay.
That's they didn't fictionalize any of that. They didn't even recast him. That guy actually lives there, actually built that thing.
Was that the same guy that the real Christopher interacted with?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and here's the thing, because a lot of this is speculative.
Okay, that's true. We don't
It's
have Christopher to
likely
back it up.
that while he lived at the slabs, he would have interacted with this guy. Small community.
Correct. Yeah.
But this guy that's just kind of like this old, grizzled, grizzled's not the right word. There's just deep joy in his eyes. And I remember as a youth, I look at this guy, and this guy's very much a Christian. And he says, he talks about how important love is.
Mm-hmm.
And Christopher McCandless says, you really love this, don't you? And he's like, oh, it's the most important thing in the world. And he says, and it's the most influential story, something like that. Oh, yeah, I have it. This is a love story that is staggering to people all over the world, that God really loves us a lot. All right, Leonard Knight's his name.
Leonard Knights. Okay.
Right, so they
And that was the real Leonard Knights.
yeah,
That's
and so
fascinating.
this guy, he doesn't really quite give the gospel account, and I
Right.
would be willing to wager he did.
Yeah.
And they just cut it for
Storytelling
for
purposes.
storytelling purposes. But like, there's a subtext throughout this movie of Christopher McCandless's very real encounter with God and conversion to Christianity.
Okay, so there's the assumption that when he died of the Christian faith?
Yeah. Well,
Because, I mean, his last,
his dying words,
according to the movie,
according to the movie, and that I believe it is factual because it's a note that he left there. Basically, what he says at the end of the movie is as he's dying, he realizes that this is his deathbed, and so he writes a handwritten letter, like basically God bless everybody. And I know that doesn't sound like, oh, this person is a Christian,
right?
but and it bums me out that we can't find the exact writing, because it's in the specific writing, to me, says this is a person that's truly encountered God and is not just echoing cultural Christianity. The movie jumps around a lot. It opens up with him in Alaska, and then it kind of just jumps around and cuts around between his 2 years leading up to his Alaska trip and his 100 days spent in Alaska.
Right.
For the purpose of this podcast, I'd rather kind of go through his life chronologically.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. Yeah.
Because I think I think looking at what his life was, those last years of his life, I think we get a picture of what he thought of the world.
Yeah.
Better than what the movie's trying to tell you the world is about.
Right.
Because Christopher McCandless doesn't learn what the movie's trying to tell us until his last couple days.
Yeah.
When he first gets, I know I just said I want to go chronologically, but I do want to read.
So at the end of the movie,
I do want to read, like, in his first few days at the Magic Bus, he finds this big piece of wood and carves into it a poem. Right. And I have it here, and I want to read it.
Is that the Thoreau poem?
So
it's not the one from Thoreau, is it?
No, throughout the movie, we hear him quote all kinds of poetry,
right.
and they don't tell us who it's from.
Okay.
But his own poem. 2 years he walks the earth. No phone, no pool, no pets, no cigarettes. Ultimate freedom. An extremist, an aesthetic voyager whose home is the road. Escaped from Atlanta. Thou shalt not return. 'Cause, quote, the West is the best. And now, after 2 rambling years, comes the final and greatest adventure, the climactic battle to kill the false being within and victoriously conclude the spiritual revolution. 10 days and nights of freight trains and hitchhiking bring him to the great white north. No longer to be poisoned by civilization, he flees and walks alone upon the land to become lost in the wild. There's a lot of idealism and romanticism here. As a young man, as a youth, that was what I took away from this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And Christopher McCandless looks and behaves a lot like 2 guys that are about 10 years older than me that were very influential to me as well. And both of them kind of had similar stories of having a really big fissure with their parents and kind of running away from their family, from the church, from their community. That wasn't my story, but that's the story I saw repeating these 2 guys. And so for me, this movie is very personal and very nostalgic, and with deep ties to my roots. The movie, the chronology of his life opens up with him graduating Emory College.
Right.
Graduating with grades well enough that he believes he can go to Harvard.
Law school.
Yeah, he's got $24,000 and a handful of dollars and cents of money to his name, and his parents say, "Hey, if you want to go to Harvard, we will pay the rest." But this happens right before an argument where he says the thing that, like, whenever I think of this movie, there's this one line that's kind of like memory wormed into me, which is, "The Datsun one's great." Because his parents offer to buy him a new car.
Yep.
They want to say, "Hey,
not a Volvo or an Escalade, but a new car."
We're not going to get you a Cadillac.
Right, that's what they say.
And because his point was, are you worried what the neighbors might think? Right? So right out of the gate, Barb's at his parents, you know? You're worried what the neighbors might think, right? The Datsun one's great. And so you get really quickly, there's a lot of friction with him and his parents.
And you don't know why right off the bat.
You don't know why.
You just don't know, is he angsty? Are they
You don't know why. You get the impression that his parents are very materialistic,
right,
and he is very much a dematerial.
Well, in the first scene of the movie, the very first scene of the movie is the mom waking up worried about her son. Mm-hmm. So, like, they're setting it up for you to be sympathetic about the parents initially.
Yeah.
So, like, there is that kind of bait and switch type of thing where you're like,
and they keep returning to that. That's that's a theme throughout the movie.
They do. So, like, they're definitely trying to keep you sympathetic towards the parents, even though they have had their errors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're not good people.
No.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they didn't love their son.
Of course.
They loved them the way that they were capable of.
I think they made a fault that a lot of parents make, which is they loved themselves more than their kids, right? And that's a fault that I'd say nearly all parents make.
Yeah.
From if not consistently, at least from time to time.
In moments, yeah, absolutely.
His parents, we find out, were getting divorced.
Mm-hmm.
They sat down the kids for a family meeting when they were teenagers, this is before college, and say, "Hey, we're getting divorced. You guys need to decide who you want to live with," which I know is not unique to them. That's a story I've heard so many times.
Right.
And as a parent, like that's as a child as well, that's just an unbelievable amount of responsibility to put on a young person's shoulders.
I've never, praise the Lord, I've never been on that side of a divorce.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think there's a right way to do that though. Either you tell your kids where you're going or you give them the choice, but either way, there's a weight there that I've never experienced, and that's I can't put myself in their shoes to verbalize how they would be feeling,
Yeah.
Like I don't know what the correct way to do that is. Cuz like both are like, okay, cuz the argument to what you initially said would be like, okay, instead of making them putting the weight on their shoulders, we'll make the choice for them. But now what if you're making the choice that they're going right? So there's like
and this isn't even a theme in the movie, but it needs to be said. Actually, I guess it is kind of a theme in the movie because we see it with Rainey and Jan.
It's introduced.
Yeah. Is that love is not a feeling, it is an action and a commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And when a marriage falls out of love, it is because of a lack of a commitment and a lack of action, not a lack of feeling.
Right.
And so if you got teenagers and you're considering divorce, divorce isn't the solution to the problem. It is the solution to a symptom.
Yeah.
But you're not solving the problem by getting divorced. And then you're heaping that baggage of your own unsolved problems onto your children, which is at no point as a parent should you be burdening your children. Right? Like if you're having financial trouble, your kids don't need to know about that. If you're having marriage trouble, your kids don't need to know about that. Are you fighting with your brothers and sisters? Your kids don't need to know about that, right? Like, don't burden your kids with your emotional baggage.
Right.
Anyway, then we see that he takes out all the money that he has in savings.
Mm-hmm.
He gifts $24,000 to, I can't remember which.
A charity. A charity of some, I don't remember
I think United Way, with a note of, this is my life savings, feed people with it. And then the remaining balance, which is a few $100s and some change, he stuffs in his pocket, gets in his Datsun, drives off, parks in the desert, flash flood comes, destroys his car, and he burns his remaining cash.
He removes the license plate, gives himself some time to continue to disappear.
Yep. And so he's running away from his parents, running away from his whole life.
He's running away from himself.
Yep. He's running away from himself.
He's trying to strip away everything that he was beforehand.
And he has a romantic ideal that you don't need money.
Right.
That subsistence living is sufficient. In his own words, money makes people cautious. Money and power is an illusion, right? And he's very much a romantic. And I remember as a young man watching this. This was I was very sympathetic to this.
Mm-hmm.
And then as in my 20s, I realized, like, I became much more focused on like agriculturalism, and the big difference between agriculturalism and subsistence living is community.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can wander all over, and there's enough food just like available for free that I'd never starve. But you don't build community that way,
right?
And that's a major theme in this.
Yeah.
So yeah, he burns all his money and wanders off further. He's hiding. He's running from his life. To give his worldview kind of a political definition, the best term for it, I think, is anarcho-primitivist. So anarcho-primitivists, they're anarchists, but they're anarchists who also don't think that we need careers, that we need anything more than hunter-gatherer.
And I think a little bit of that came out when he was at the one ranger station or whatever, and he was trying to kayak down the river.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, 12 years.
At 12 years,
you can 12 years from now, we can put you on the list of 12. Like, and I think there's that moment of like, they're showing that contrast of like just how much the government's restricting nature. The ability to go out and experience nature, whether it's dangerous or not, it's nature. Like it's God's country. It should not be regulated by man. If it's just, so I think there was just that contrast of like, I've relinquished everything just to be restricted by government,
Yeah. And obviously this feeds heavily into my biases, right?
Lay it on me.
I resonate with this so much. So before I go into my anti-government rant that I love to do, I want to know
a jingle for that.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. On this episode of
a little bell that goes off. one of my buddies was teasing me. He's like, I'm going to start a timer and see how long it takes for you to start ranting against the government. I was like, basically, as soon as we start talking biases.
When do we hit record?
Yeah. So I want to ease off the gas pedal of my opinions. Jeff, how did you feel in that scene?
So I was angry. Like, and I was angry, not necessarily because like, I guess step back a little bit. Like, I wasn't necessarily rooting for this character to run away from his family. Like, my personality and the way I grew up, like, I couldn't imagine doing that. Like this, he did something that I couldn't even fathom. But in that moment where all he wanted to do was kayak down a river, whether dangerous or not, he couldn't do it. And so like I was frustrated. Like there's some things that should be restricted, and it seems to be no restriction in aspects of government, or no help in government, no assistance in government. And you're like, okay, where are they at in this moment? But then you got these moments where like, it's just recreational. And now they're restricting it to literally a 12-year gap between its admission, submitting an application to actually getting to go down the river. So they're more focused on that. There's more regulations than there are for other things that I believe I would elevate at a higher necessity. And so that's kind of just where my mind was like, I get it probably started out pure of like, so we're going to be safe. We're going to make sure people are trained first. Okay. Now there's probably different regulations for, they have to get some sort of different classes for rapids and stuff. Like I get that it probably started out pure for regulating who goes down that major crazy river. But in that same sense, like if someone wants to go out and just be in nature, you shouldn't have to get a license. You shouldn't have to get, what was not a license, a permit. There it is. Like it just, I see both sides, but in that moment of the movie, I was rooting for him to go just walk out of the office, go find a kayak and go down that river. Mm-hmm. Like that's what I was saying in my mind. Like I'm not one to break laws. Like I'm very much, I'm not much of a law crusher, or I don't know what the phrase would be. Like I stick to regulations. I don't put
as anti-authoritarian.
Right. I don't push boundaries. I'm also not much of a, I don't like confrontation. So like, but in that moment, I'm just like, dude, just go out and be in nature.
Yep.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. In my ideal world, there is no government and all land is privately owned. And so the river doesn't disappear just because it's privately owned.
Right.
And the types of people that want to do whitewater rafting aren't going to just disappear because it's privately owned either.
Right.
Right. So instead, we now have incentives for companies and organizations to maintain these waterways really well and have really quick and efficient processes to get people to get into the water.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't have a 12-year wait. You wouldn't have a guy being the only guy in the station spending his whole time trying to convince a girl over the phone to have a three-way with him.
Yeah.
Not at all emotionally. Like, you're going to have people that are there because they want to be there, that are there because they're passionate about it. Like, that's just the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everything about that interaction in a private society would be totally different. Right? Entirely different. And just the inefficiency and ineptitude of a 12-year wait to kayak down a river, like, if that doesn't make your blood boil, like, then you don't understand how that is not just one slight of the government that they missed. Right. No, this is emblematic of how everything in government works, right? Like, it's all that, all the way down.
Yeah.
All right. I'll get off that high horse for a while. All right. So, so he runs away from Emery. He's walking out and he meets Rainey and Jan. And he's only with Rainey and Jan the first time for overnight.
Right.
And actually, I guess 2 nights. And the first night, she's talking to him. Rainey goes over to reach for her and she pulls away. And he sees this. And you can see it. His mind's kind of working through it. How do I feel about this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way it's shot, the way it's framed, I think we get the impression that he immediately assumes less of Rainey, not of Jan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes sense given his parents' relationship. And then the next day, he goes and he's gathering wood. He sees Rainey. Jan's walking down the beach. He sees Rainey. And Rainey says to him, I've loved that woman a lot of years, bruh. And lately, we've been going through something real quiet. But then we've picked you up, and that quiet thing we've been going through, well, she's talking about it, you know?
Yeah.
And Christopher's like, yeah, I think I know what you mean. He's like, what do you think? And he's like, well, sometimes people don't feel like they can give themselves permission to be loved. And so they walk off quietly into quiet places, right? Rainey kind of encourages him to chase after Jan. Christopher goes after Jan. They spend the afternoon playing on the beach. And that evening when they come back, Jan and Rainey's relationship is rekindled in a dramatic way. And come morning, Chris is gone. By this time, he's actually taken on a name, no longer Christopher McCandless, Alexander Supertramp.
Supertramp.
And the movie doesn't cover this, but in the book it does. He named himself after the band, Supertramp. Around this time, they had their greatest success, which is their album, Breakfast in America. If you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. It's a great album. He's hit the road. And at this point, like, we kind of get this rhythm that he has, where he finds people, he sticks around for a while until he feels he's given them everything he can, and he's gotten from them everything he can, and then he's gone. And it's kind of almost like, and this is going to be a reference lost on our entire audience, but I'm going to make it anyway. There's a Canadian TV show from the 80s called The Littlest Hobo. And it's about a German shepherd who goes town to town solving kids' problems. I strongly recommend it. Littlest Hobo, check it out.
I'm into it.
So you gotta get this, like, he has a very selfish lifestyle, and they're romanticizing it. And it takes him almost 2 years of living like this. And throughout those 2 years, everybody he's interacting with is really pushing back on that and trying to tell him, you need to pay more attention to the people around you. Invest in the people around you. Put down roots. Love on the people around you who are also loving on you. And the weird thing is, like, he's not an unloving person. He's incredibly compassionate, incredibly loving.
Right.
And there's this weird dichotomy of it where he's also incredibly selfish.
I don't know if I can sum that up any better than what you did. Yeah, no, in that specific moment, I don't have any thoughts. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Yeah. You nailed that one.
And and despite all that, despite everything I just said about him, like, I love this man that I've never met. I read a book about him, watched a movie about him a bunch of times. I love this guy because, and especially because he reminds me so much of two guys that were really influential for me. So when I was in high school, around this time that I'm watching this all the time, our good friend John, he was my youth pastor. For my graduation present, he bought me a book about a guy from our area who, a year after his wife died, hiked the Appalachian Trail. And John bought this book for me because he knew my plan was a year of disaster relief missions, hike the Appalachian Trail, business school. What ended up happening was 3 years of disaster relief missions, because in the first year I met a woman that I wanted to marry, and I did marry. And I have never gotten around to the Appalachian Trail. And if I had told myself that when I was 15, it would have broke my heart.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, if I get to it, I get to it.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's not where life is.
Right.
Now, the reason that would have broke my heart is because of what Christopher McCandless says to Mr. Franz. Yeah. I believe you have this written down as well, right?
Just, you have it more detailed, but just the one specific line, you don't need human relationships to be happy. God has placed it all around us. But you've got the more in detailed.
Yeah, so that's what Christopher McCandless says.
Right.
You don't need
human relationships to be happy. God has placed it all around us.
Before we go forward, what do you think of that?
So on my notes here for the podcast, that was one of the things that I had down for us to talk about as a bias, like as something that, whether it was proving true or proving false, it was a bias that it was bringing to light. And I definitely disagree. I can't thrive. I personally can't see life without other human interactions. Even if it's people that I loathe, I'd rather be with people that I don't like versus be with no one at all. So I do believe God has placed happiness all around us. I do believe God has given us, like, God is the epitome of joy. Like we find our joy in God, but like I do believe he's also designed us to be in community.
Yes.
When he created us as human beings, he created us in a duo, not in a solo.
Well, he did create a single.
Right. But he created a second one
He
right
created
after.
a single and said it's not good that you be alone.
Right. So we are designed to be in partnership.
Social creatures.
Right. So like I get what he's saying, but I disagree.
Yeah, I disagree as well. And I think the whole point of the movie, which I missed as a teenager
Okay.
and I get now, is that that's wrong.
Yeah.
Because Mr. Franz says, "Hey, listen, I've gleaned enough from our relationship that you've got serious problems with your parents and with the church. But you seem to believe that there's something greater than all of us, and you seem comfortable calling it God.
Yep.
So we're going to call it God. When you forgive, you love, and when you love, God's light shines on you." And then, of course, we have Sean Penn's directorial choice of the clouds part and the sun comes down on them. Christopher McCandless is like, well, shit. and Mr. Franz is like, what did I tell you about strong language? Yeah. They start howling laughing.
Yeah.
And then that cinematic choice is repeated again at the end of the movie when he writes his goodbye letter to the world saying, I love all of you. God bless all of you.
Mm-hmm.
He looks out the window of his bus and the sun
is shining down.
Shines down on him. Now, I think having the clouds part and the sun shine, the glory of God through the sun shine down on somebody, that's a really on-the-nose directorial choice, and I wouldn't have done it, but it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
can I pause you right there?
Yeah.
Just because like this, you've seen this movie a million times, and so this is my perspective is coming into this fresh. I'd only seen the trailer before going into this. I didn't know that he died at the end.
Oh.
I didn't know any spoilers.
Did it break your heart?
It did. I'm watching this. I'm like, and he just said that line, and he just envisioned him hugging his parents again. I'm like he achieved his goal of why he went into the wilderness. Now he's ready to go. Like I assumed, I'm an optimist, so I assumed that this was going to end well. And next thing I know, like I had to pause. I think I paused it and I realized there's only 5 minutes left. I'm like, oh no. I started to piece together, and as he slowly just started smiling and the camera panned out, I'm like, no, please don't go to credits. So yeah, this movie was, out of all the movies we've watched so far, like I think I was more emotionally impacted by this movie.
Yeah.
By the ending of it, because I feel like he achieved personal redemption, or he achieved his personal goal, I believe, according to the movie. If we're relying just on the movie,
I think he forgave his parents in his heart before he died.
right? So I feel like his journey was successful, but I would love to have seen it ended with redemption for his parents. Yeah. Or rekindling with his parents. So I was rooting for that last moment of him and his parents, and that was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So I just want to I experienced that for the first time going into the movie, not knowing how it ended, not knowing anything about this character, this real life person. I did not know he died. And I watched it this afternoon, the day before we're filming, and I just had to sit on the couch with it for a little bit. I'm like, man, that sucks.
Yeah.
Because I was about to look up, where's this dude now? What's he doing now? I was excited to start looking up these things, and I was like, well,
not much.
He's not, hasn't done much since 92. Yeah. He's still in the wild. Yeah.
So, and I mentioned earlier that there's something I didn't like about the movie now,
Okay.
and this is it.
Okay.
Christopher McCandless, he realizes that Mr. Franz was right. He realizes that Jan was right. He realizes that Rainey was right. He realizes Wayne was right. He realizes all of these people throughout the last 2 years who have been trying to convince him, you need to forgive your parents. Yeah. You need to go home. You need to love your parents. He realizes they were right. And the way that they show us that in the movie is so subtle. So he's at his bus and he's reading a collection of essays by Tolstoy. Mm-hmm. For those who don't know, Leo Tolstoy was a Russian anarcho-Christian. Okay, and Tolstoy has done incredible writing on the importance of community and relationship, your relationship with the people around you, your relationship with God, and your relationship to the state. So we have a full chunk of quote from one of his short stories that is in this collection. I have lived through much, and now I think I have found what is needed for happiness. A quiet, secluded life in the country with the possibility of being useful to people to whom it is easy to do good and who are not accustomed to have it done to them. Then work which one hopes may be of some use. Then rest, nature, books, music, love for one's neighbor. Such is my idea of happiness. And then on top of all that, you for a mate, and children perhaps. What more can the heart of a man desire? It's after reading that he attempts to leave. Mm-hmm. Not having finished his 100 days in Alaska.
Right.
He's like, all right, you know
he's
what?
Putting his pants on.
And the river's too high.
Yeah.
And he comes back and he reads in Dr. Zhivago, a book I haven't read, but I've heard great things about.
I can't even say the name, so.
Call everything by its proper name. So he goes out, and at this point he can't get meat.
He has to go forage.
So he starts foraging, and this is potentially what actually ends up killing him. And then we echo back to that, call everything by its proper name, when his last writing he signs Christopher Jonathan McCandless, not Alexander
his alias.
Supertramp.
Yeah.
So he's calling himself by his own name. He's forgiven his parents.
He's reclaimed his identity.
He's reclaimed his identity. I believe in this moment, he's forgiven his parents. I believe in this moment, based on what we see his last message about God bless everybody, I love everybody, blah, blah, blah. I believe he truly did encounter God. He understood God in a new way. He's reading Tolstoy, you can't read Tolstoy and not get the gospel out of that.
Right.
And so I do believe that Christopher McCandless, on his deathbed, was at peace with all these people, but they didn't get that closure.
Right.
Which is just...
It's heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But I think it was a mistake that we have this scene. This scene is the climax of his emotional journey, and it gets undermined by jumping back in time now to him meeting Mr. Franz, because it undoes this character arc he has, this emotional maturity he has, because we now jump back in time. And the last thing he says about relationships is, you're wrong if you think the joy of life comes principally from human relationships. I think the Leo Tolstoy moment is much more powerful if you experience it after that. Mm-hmm. And so me as an adult now watching this, I hear the Tolstoy part and I'm like, yes, Tolstoy gets it. And then I see you're wrong if you think the joy of life comes from principally from human relationships. Now as an adult, I look at that and say, oh, you were so naive. But as a teenager, I hear the Tolstoy stuff, and I'm like, Tolstoy, what does he know? And I hear him talking to Mr. Franz, like, yeah, he gets it. So that's what I don't like about this movie. I think it undermines the real lesson that Christopher McCandless learned, and unfortunately learned too late. The other person that he quotes a lot throughout it is Henry David Thoreau, who you mentioned earlier. So Tolstoy, we have this Christian anarchist, Tolstoy, and then Thoreau. I don't
know much about Thoreau.
So Thoreau was a lot.
I only know him as long as I can throw him.
Boo. Thoreau's most influential work was probably Walden Pond.
Oh, okay.
So Henry David Thoreau lived in the time of the Spanish-American War.
Who was that between?
The
Spanish and Americans. Okay, that checks
fighting
out.
Over Mexico.
That checks out. Okay.
Henry David Thoreau is one of my personal heroes. He and Christopher McCandless are two peas in a pod. Mm-hmm. If you read Walden Pond, so Walden was his mentor.
Okay.
Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Oh, okay.
Owned a big piece of land, and on it was a small pond, which he let his student, Henry David Thoreau, live in a cabin in this place, and it's the same story, except he doesn't die. There's also a play made about Henry David Thoreau, which dramatizes a big moment in his life that, for me, I think is really illustrative of how we can interact with the government. So, as I said, he's living during the Spanish-American War, and he actually got imprisoned for tax evasion. But the tax evasion in question was actually a willingness to pay my taxes as long as you can promise me that none of my taxes will be funding this war that I disagree with. And they said, no, we can't do that. He's like, okay, well then I'm not paying my taxes. And so he served time in prison. And I think because of where I'm at in life, and I've got a wife and kids that I have to support, that is not a level of civil disobedience that I can do.
Yeah.
And we've talked about civil disobedience before. you have to weigh how much you're willing to give.
What
to live by your
sacrifices can you
principles.
make? Yeah.
And if you're Thoreau, living in a cabin by yourself, you can put it all on the line,
Right.
and you should. You should live your principles.
Yeah. I've got a quote in here, and this is Christopher. There's a quote that says, "I'm going to paraphrase Thoreau here. Rather than love, than money, than faith, than fame, than fairness, give me truth."
Yeah.
And so I feel like, I don't remember what part of the movie that was. I believe that was when he was talking to,
Jan and Rainey.
yeah, right. Yeah. And so
Because that scene is when Jan is challenging Christopher McCandless that he's being unfair to his parents.
okay. So yeah, so that's still foreshadowing he hasn't had the heart change. He hasn't had the time in Alaska yet and stuff. So that was another one where I'm like, I don't know if I fully agree with that. Cause like, those are all good things. Love's great. Money's great. Faith's great. Fame can be great. Fairness. I think fairness is great and truth is great. Like, I don't know if like there was some weight to some of those where I'm like, I don't know if that statement's fully valid, but then again, I think, we're in that moment, we're learning that he's still learning what these things are too.
Yeah.
And he's, because he has a tainted view of love. The love he learned from his parents wasn't a nuclear love, and money, like he was shown that the love of money was higher than the love of family, or the love of career was higher than the love of biological family and stuff. So I can see why he said that, but like in that statement, I was like, I don't agree with that. Like
I don't know that I disagree with it.
Okay. Why?
When you're saying like love, truth, blah, blah, and ranking these, it reminds me, of course, of 1 Corinthians 3:13,
Yep.
13:13, sorry.
The marriage verse.
Yeah, and now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love.
Mm-hmm.
Not listed there is truth.
Right.
Where would Paul rank truth if you had a faith, hope, love, and truth?
Yeah.
Since Paul sees Jesus as the human embodiment of truth, I think it's safe to. I mean, he's also the human embodiment of love.
Correct. And hope.
And hope. Yeah, he's all these things. I don't think it would be unreasonable to say that Paul would also put truth either tied for second or tied for first.
Right.
I think that he would also put it very, very high up there. More than love, I want truth. I don't know if I would say that, but I also think that if I'm getting love and it's not true,
Right.
am I really getting love?
But you can show love not by lying, but by withholding truth. So I'm not telling you something false. I'm just not telling you something at all.
Yeah.
And
that's a level of trust you have to have.
right. So I I agree. This is not like it. This isn't like a.
And you keep in mind, he's idealistic. He's naive.
Right.
He's
But in that moment when he said that, I'm like, and I also didn't know where he was headed. I
Yeah.
didn't know how he ended up.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm like, okay.
It's
So
the whole story is beautiful and tragic.
it's so poetic, and I love that there's the nuances of poetry throughout it as well. Yeah. So I was very happy with. I mean, not the way it ended, but like I'm very happy with the way it impacted me.
Yeah.
And how I look at some of the things that he experienced.
Yeah. Like if Christopher McCandless, if I were to meet today a man identical, like because I've known several of him throughout my life, right? Mm-hmm. Thoreau was him. Like he's almost an archetype of a person,
right?
And I've known a lot of these people. And if I were to meet him today, and I was very close to being this person, if I would meet him today, I know that he and I would have a lot to disagree on, right? Because like he says, careers are a 20th century invention.
I had that on my list too.
It's like
that was early on in the movie.
Listen, I know that feels good to say, but it's not true, right? And he says, joy of life comes you're wrong if you think the joy of life comes principally from human relationships. I know that feels good to say, and it's very poetic.
Right.
It's not true. And so I think him and I would have a lot to talk about and disagree on. But I also get the impression from this guy that as long as you're keeping it civil, and as long as he would be happy to disagree.
Yeah.
And have that conversation.
Because he definitely didn't see eye to eye with Mr. Franz on a lot of things, especially the spiritual aspect, at least leading up until their final conversation. Like you could definitely tell, like they had a lot more off screen because like there was in their conversation, you could tell that they've dialogued about this before off screen or off of our perspective. It's like I feel like there was more weight to him disagreeing with him versus him and anyone else that he interacted with in the movie. At least I perceived it that way.
They had a very... I think everybody that they chose to include, because undoubtedly there were so many more people that he met.
I imagine, yeah. I mean, you can't travel those thousands of miles and not...
Everybody that they spent more than a couple minutes with, you know that he had deep relationship, like emotional bonds with. Right? With Jan, we find out that she has a son about his age, who she hasn't spoke to in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so there's this really interesting thing where with all of the adults in the movie, he's looking for the love and affirmation that he needs from a parent that he never got.
Right. And
all of them seem to be giving him the parenting and hoping for the love and affirmation that not affirmation, but love and respect that a healthy parent-child relationship has. Yeah. And they get that, but it's not. It doesn't scratch that itch because it's not.
Right. However, but I did notice in the way you're wording it made me realize like you did see a transformation though, because a young Christopher had the moment to have an encounter with this young lady, Kristen Stewart's character.
Yes.
And she
serves herself up on a platter.
Right. Like, and he's like, no. And because like,
or at least the story we're told is that he said
correct.
No. I'd like to believe that is what happened.
And I feel like he took on the role of maybe not a father figure, but a brother, a family member figure, and said, no, I respect you too much to cross a boundary that would be disrespectful to you, even though it would be an enjoyment for this very moment. And it's like, I think that he was learning on this journey because I don't think it's
incidental that the actress playing his sister looks so much like Kristen Stewart.
I actually thought, at first I'm like, wait, was it? Yeah. So I had to go back and check like, okay, that wasn't Kristen Stewart at the beginning. Yeah. That's a very good point. I didn't think about that. But yeah, he had all these different figures that gave him some new parental guidance. And then he did have the opportunity to return it and go, hey, no, I see you as more than this.
Yeah.
Because I'm now experiencing this and I haven't gotten that before either. Someone now sees the value in me and I want to see the value. So like, I thought that was beautiful. And I'm just now coming full circle with that as we're discussing with this.
Yeah. One of the people that he interacts with that we haven't talked about is Vince Vaughn's character, Wayne.
Yeah.
So, and there's so much in this
He's
movie.
the biggest mystery of the movie.
I love Wayne's character. So actually, before I went off to do disaster relief, there was a brief period of time there, my dad tried to convince me, you can join these groups that they're combine harvesters and they travel across the country. And that's basically what he was doing.
They just combine fields.
Yeah, and they move from one to the area, and you do it for, I think it's like 4 months, and you make good money, but you're a teenager.
Right.
And my dad really wanted me to do that. I wasn't interested, but that's what he's doing here. He's signed on with Wayne, who is, all we know about Wayne is he's selling little black boxes. He's suspicious of the FBI, and then the FBI comes and arrests him.
And he wasn't surprised at all.
And he wasn't surprised.
Not at all.
he was surprised at how many of them there were.
It's true. It's true.
So there's an interaction that they have, and I love it. I love this interaction. They're drinking at a bar, and it's the only time we see Christopher McCandless inebriated in the entire film.
Right.
Rainey and Jan are smoking weed around him all the time. He does not partake.
Nope.
Right? And
Just the only substance he uses in the whole film, outside of
one time
the
is
natural
we see him drinking
poison he potentially eats at the end of the movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says to Wayne, money and power is an illusion, which I'd like to say, no, it's not. Money and power is a very real thing.
It's been real from the very beginning.
There are some people that believe that money is a creation of government because it's used to, like, we give it to you and you give it back to us in the form of taxation, and that forces you to engage in commerce. That's the idea. Basically, the king would give it to soldiers.
Yeah.
The soldiers would spend their money with the baker, and the baker has to pay his taxes, so the baker has to do business with the soldier to get the money to pay his taxes. That's the theory.
That's deep.
That's the theory. Dave something is one of the biggest.
Thomas.
No.
From Wendy's.
Not that one, actually. It's a good try, though.
Yeah. All the Daves.
Dave Graeber, he was an anthropologist, and he had a pretty well-researched book. He had lots of good reasons why he believed this was the case, but he was bringing with it his own biases of he was an anarchist, but he was more of the communist anarchist, the anarcho-primitivist, even that we don't need money. Karl Menger, way predates Dave Graeber. Graeber died just recently and relatively young. Menger was like before Marx, and Menger wrote a book called Money, and it's about the origins of money. And basically, there is always a money. Money has to do a handful of things, but one of the biggest things it has to do is be a medium of exchange, be easily divisible, and be a store of value. Mm-hmm. What that means is, for money to be good, it needs to be able to be worth the same today as it will be a year from now. It's one of the big reasons that fiat currencies, government monies, where they inflate them a lot, they're bad monies because a year later they're not worth as much.
Right.
The reason that gold is such a good money is because it doesn't change in value. It doesn't rust, doesn't deteriorate. You can divide it very easily. You start with a brick, you break down into chunks of bricks, you break that down into coins, very easily divisible.
And then teeth.
That's right.
Yep.
And then medium of exchange. Let's say that I am a fisherman. And
Nelson, you're a fisherman.
That's right. And Jeff, you're a baker.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, that's great as long as I want bread and you want fish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what if you don't like fish and I really like bread?
Okay.
And I can't bake. Well, how do I go about getting bread? Because you don't want fish. So now I have to make trades with other people to get the stuff that you want.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier if we have a medium of exchange, something that we agree both has value and that you know you're going to be able to reuse to trade with somebody else. So barter trade is what Dave Graeber says everybody did until governments forced them to use currencies. Menger makes the case that no,
it just naturally happened.
It's a natural phenomenon. And we see it in all kinds of different cultures. Glass beads, seashells, gold, silver, brass, bronze. If it lasts a long time, if it's hard to make more of it, those are big features that a money needs to have. Anyway, so that's I go through all that just to say, if I were to meet Christopher McCandless today and he says to me, money's an illusion, I'm sorry, Mr. McCandless, you're simply mistaken. Yeah. And I understand why you feel that way, but that's simply not the way the world is.
Right.
Anyway, moving past that, I have a big quote from him. Is there anything you want to say on that before we go on?
Not on that, no.
Okay.
I've only got one more bias as far as I'm
go
close to the end of my notes.
Hit me with your bias.
Okay.
And then I'll do the Wayne scene.
Last one I have. So before I say it, I have I wouldn't say a huge background, but I have in my young life, I've done a lot of men's ministry or I've done a lot of youth ministry with specifically high school guys and stuff. So there was one line in the movie that it jumped out at me, and it was, I believe it was Christopher that said this, but it says the core of a man's spirit comes from new experiences.
Yeah, that's with Mr. Franz.
Okay,
that's when he uses reverse psychology to get him to climb the mountain.
So I adhered to that, and I think in that moment, I don't think I can disagree with that. I think as a guy, and let's be honest, I'm not a very adventurous guy. Yeah. So just because it's a new experience doesn't mean it has to be an adventure. For me, a new experience is, there's a new coffee out. But I do feel like the man's spirit, or the man's utter desire.
And here we're saying man is human, not men? Or do you think this is more unique to men than women?
Oh. I don't
know what he's
okay,
saying.
In my mind, I related it to men's ministry, specifically
more men than women.
Biologically man.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just saying I relate to that. I was I do thrive with new experiences, and I do desire that daily.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciated that line. I thought that was something that was a message worth repeating here on the podcast.
Yes. The core of man's spirit comes from new experiences. Now, you say you're not an adventurous person.
Not like in the outdoorsy
right.
category.
And I do want to push back because a new experience is an adventure.
That's true.
Right? It doesn't have to be...
I agree with that.
Right? So I think...
But I won't go hiking.
Sure, but I think you sell yourself short.
I would never... Yeah, I would not hike out to the Magic Bus.
Yeah. I have a long history of depression, manic depressive, so I medicate for it now, but for a long time I was able to use just behavioral methods to deal with it. And one of the biggest ways for all people that experience depression, and certainly true of me, is accomplish a thing. Pick a task, do it, especially if it's something new.
Right.
And as simple as that sounds, when you're depressed, it is the hardest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of really bolsters that argument of the core of a man's spirit is in new experiences. When you stop doing new things, your spirit starts to atrophy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah, and I do, and I guess since you've mentioned it, I do think it could venture into both genders.
Mm-hmm.
Like but just because of my specific experiences, I relate to men's ministry, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say us as the human soul thrive in different ways, thrive on new experiences, whether it's a new child, a new relationship, a new food, a new TV show, like a new just any I absolutely was
new skill.
Yeah. 100%. A new major, changing your courses in college for the umpteenth time. Like
8 times on average.
Yeah.
I think trying new stuff. Like one of my favorite hobbies is collecting, specifically collecting hobbies. And
That's deep.
Jen gets upset with me because I'll sink a couple $100 into a new venture, a new hobby. And I'll stick with it for 6 months or so, and I'm like, okay, I get this, and I'm bored, and I move on.
Next, please.
Yeah, but I need that. I need to try new stuff constantly.
Absolutely.
And it's not even a matter of challenging myself. It's like it's exploration.
Right.
You know.
I agree with that.
And I think that's very much a part of who Christopher McCandless is.
Yeah.
Right, the whole reason he's going to Alaska, or one of the big reasons, is to prove to himself he can.
Yeah.
But there's a scene in the bar, they're drinking, and I love this scene. It's the only scene we see him drunk. When people are drunk, they're at their most idealistic. Mm-hmm. They're also at their least articulate and poetic.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, because you know what I don't understand? I don't understand why people are so bad to each other so often. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Judgment, control, all that. Parents and hypocrites, politicians and pricks. This is what he says to Wayne. Right. He said, like, he's going to go escape society, the sick society. And Wayne starts coughing. He's like, society. And I love this scene because on the one hand, Wayne is mocking him, but you know that he loves him.
Right.
And he wants what's best for him. And so he's teasing him, but it's like this is like a brother relationship,
like
not
an acknowledgement type of tease. Yeah.
But then he pokes him in the forehead and says, "This is a mistake. It's a mistake to get too deep into that kind of stuff, Alex. You're a hell of a young guy, but I promise you this. You're a young guy, blood and fire. You're juggling blood and fire."
Yep.
I think Wayne is not really a father figure to Chris. He is a big brother.
Yeah.
A big brother he never had, obviously.
Yeah.
Very much a mentor, but like a big brother, Dutch uncle kind of relationship.
Not to be confused with Dutch oven. I just want to clarify.
Yeah. Dutch oven.
Dutch oven, Dutch uncle, two different things. Just trust me.
What do you feel about that scene? What did that evoke in you?
Yeah, no, that was one of the. I didn't copy and paste this one into my notes, but it was one of the ones I assumed that we were going to talk about. The part in that whole situation that jumped out to me was you could tell he was coming in hurt from control.
Yeah.
Like, not hurt from neglect. I mean, like, he just graduated from college. So, like, so there wasn't necessarily like he was neglected physically or nutritionally, but like he was
emotionally neglected.
He was abused by control and restriction.
Yeah. It's because when we're drunk, we're our most idealistic and least
articulate.
Right. He really lays bare and really kind of betrays himself in saying exactly what his issue is.
Yeah.
And he might not even be aware of it.
Yeah. I mean, like in the first one he talked about was parents. Mm-hmm. Like, so like the root of what he's coming from is parents. Then goes to hypocrites, which I'm assuming he's talking about his parents
people.
still.
Yeah.
And then politicians.
Yeah.
Which then now it's going to the people that my parents listen to.
Well, and we know that he had an A's in all of his classes, and the 2 courses they tell us that he was studying: modern African politics,
right,
and apartheid Africa.
Yeah.
And this is early 90s. Apartheid is
I
like
have no
at its
clue what
peak.
that is.
Oh, apartheid is is when you stratify a class based on a society based on race.
Okay.
And your rights are dependent on your race. So South Africa is probably our biggest modern example of apartheid, and in the 90s is when it was at its worst. And you had black people in Africa starving because they're black.
Okay.
Literally no other reason. So if I had been me at my current age in the 90s, apartheid would be one of those things that I never shut up about.
Yeah.
Because it is such
Prevalent.
a massive societal injustice. And so it's very, being outspoken against apartheid is very much in our cultural memory kind of like a left-wing thing. But it's something that anybody that knew about it was indignant about in America.
Right.
And if you weren't indignant, it's just because you didn't really understand what it was.
Right.
But he's a guy that understands the potential for a government to murder its own people.
Yeah.
Right? So when he says politicians...
Suffocate them. Strangle them.
Exactly. So when he says politicians, undoubtedly on his mind is apartheid and other similar situations.
Yeah.
At this point, had he canoed down the kayak?
No.
Was that after?
Wayne was before
That's
going to
right, 'cause it was
Mexico.
with them. So when he comes back into the States, they cut to the TV, and it's George H.W. Bush talking. That speech was the speech he gave when he announced, "Hey, we're going to go do Operation Desert Storm." And they never even really cover that in the movie, but we know he's anti-war, and so this is in the backdrop. This is happening in the American psyche, is this war against these people that most of them couldn't point to it on a map.
Right.
So when he says politicians, that's kind of part of everything that would be in his mind as
Yeah,
politicians.
he just went to 4 years of school of learning about those politicians. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know about that. Yeah.
And pricks.
Yeah. Do not forget them. Any final thoughts? I guess we should probably.
I could talk about this
I
movie
was
for
just
hours.
saying,
But let's,
honestly, this has been good.
Well, one last one.
Yeah, lay it on me.
There's a really cool
This is our
scene.
show. We can do whatever we
Yeah.
want. Yeah.
Set our own schedule. There's a really cool scene, I think, that is probably not even the most impactful scene in the whole movie, but it's a really important one. After he comes back from Mexico, he's living homeless in Los Angeles. We don't know how long this phase is. It's relatively short, I think.
Assumed.
And he's standing outside of a restaurant in LA, and he's looking in, and he's seeing affluent socialite types.
A gentleman that looks pretty similar to him.
Well, there's a man.
If he was clean.
There's a man that looks like your average lawyer,
Right.
and
But a younger guy.
a younger guy, and then he sees himself.
Oh, okay.
That actually
it
is
actually
him,
was him.
cleaned
That
up,
makes sense then.
and he kind of does the finger guns. And man, does he look like a young Leonardo DiCaprio there?
He was at Leonardo DiCaprio was actually wanted for this movie.
He would have been too old at the time, I gotta think. How old would he have been in 2007? You look it up while I talk about
I'll
this.
look it up,
Anyway, he sees himself. He sees a man that he could see himself as, right? And he's just left the customs office where he said, "I've had enough of the sand. I need some city for a while." And his first night in the city, he sees a guy that he can see himself being, and it disgusts him. So he immediately grabs his stuff and leaves again.
He would have been 33 years old.
Yeah, I feel like he's too old for that.
Yeah, but he was looked at for the movie.
Hollywood 33, that's a 24. Yeah.
I mean, because Kristen Stewart was definitely not 16 when she was playing that character.
Nah, probably not. Yeah, so I just think I don't know, there's so much poetry in this movie. It's a beautiful movie. I really love it. I love his life story. I think that Sean Penn not being a believer undermines what I think is the most powerful story.
Is the faith aspect.
Is the faith aspect, the forgiveness and apology.
Yeah.
And it's just such a tragedy that he wasn't able to go reunite with his family, which I believe was on his mind.
I want to recap some things just before we go to our final kind of questions as we sum this up. So this was an 8.1 out of 10 on the IMDb rating. It is number 222 on the top 250. 83 critic, 89 audience. Okay. So with all that being said, would you recommend this movie? I think it's
No,
absolutely not. No.
Oh man, would I? So there's nudity in the movie.
Well, no, okay. The rating. This isn't a rating question. This is just recommend.
Language, violence, and nudity is always something that is
on the forefront
of when I recommend something. So there is some nudity in this movie.
Yeah.
Some topless women, and actually at least one scene where you can see Emil Hirsch's genitals
very
quickly, and at a distance. Yeah. So I think this is a movie for a mature audience.
Absolutely.
But I would say 15, 16, I think you can handle this.
Parental discretion is advised.
Parental discretion is advised, but 15, 16, I think you can handle this. I think this is a good movie for a 15 or 16-year-old as far as like a good lesson, right? A good... Because 15, 16 like is when you're really starting to get idealistic.
Right.
And I think it's good to temper that idealism, which is what this movie should do. Mm-hmm. I think the movie feeds idealism in a sense.
So it could be dangerous.
It could be dangerous, but I think...
But it's not the only thing of its kind that's doing stuff like this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a beautiful movie. I strongly recommend it to anybody.
I would recommend it too. And I definitely would caution about the nudity and stuff, but,
and the nudity that's in it is like a non-sexual nudity.
It's not grotesque. It's
just some European woman who...
Yeah, Denmark girl. It's pretty comical, but it's
funny nudity.
But I mean, I know we've talked about this before. Like, I still don't think it was needed. I still think you could probably convey that emotion without it. Like,
yeah.
I just,
you could edit all that differently and still know that she's naked,
right? Without showing it, anything. But yeah, I'm not a fan of those scenes and stuff. But yeah, it was a comical. So just be advised, and it's so okay. The second, would you change the rating? The second question we always ask at the end, would you change the rating? It's currently rated R, or it is rated R. Not that they're going to listen to our advice, but
because of the nudity that they choose to include, you can't get away from it.
Correct. And I think that you do, and the F word's dropped more than 3 times.
Yeah, but
so honestly, that's the parameter for that as well too.
I think you could get away with a PG-13 even with the language if you would re-edit the nudity.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a fine R. Like it's a low
not
R.
It's not a filthy story.
No.
It's not a has it aged well?
Because it's a period piece, I think it's aged really well.
Yeah, I agree. I liked the cinematography. I liked the vintage on the film as well. Or like, I mean, I watched it digitally, but like there is a vintage-ish feel to the watch and stuff, and I loved it.
There's not much graphic design in it, but the graphic design that is in it feels like it's out of the
no
90s,
special effects. It's all practical. He did all of his own stunts and stuff, which I know we mentioned before, but like it was all practical.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it aged well, and I wouldn't want to change anything. I hope they never reboot this or redo this. Like, I feel like the casting was great, the music was great. Like, I wouldn't change. Like, I didn't have any dislikes.
Yeah. The only thing I would change is the
director.
No. I think Sean Penn did an incredible job with it. I don't think this movie works with any other director really, but I think that the movie would be better shot chronologically.
Okay, I can. Okay.
I get why they didn't.
Right. I was gonna say, if you need to watch The Revenant then, which again we may, I don't know if it's on the 250, but like The Revenant is fully chronologically, and it just becomes dry because now you're just watching this guy wake up, move, eat, sleep, wake up. Like, I kind of like the way, like, I appreciated it because I knew that there would be lulls in the time if it was presented any other way. But for them to go to like, and they balanced it between high energy scene in the future, low energy scene in the past. Yeah. High energy scene in the past, low energy. Like there was a nice balance to how they were contrasting what prepared them for the thing in the future, or vice versa. So like I liked the breakup, but I am a type of person that will go back through and go, okay, I'm the type of person that would love to watch the series of Lost chronologically. So I don't disagree with you when it comes to I want to see it from front to back, beginning to end.
I guess my biggest gripe is really just his revelation reading Tolstoy.
Yeah.
It gets so undermined by jumping back to Mr.
I see
Franz.
that. I can see that. Yeah.
So at least reorder how you present that.
Right.
But apart from that, I'd change nothing.
Right.
Well, maybe make it the nudity implied rather than explicit.
Correct. Final question, which I know the answer to this, but we ask it in all of it. Would this be in your top 250?
Oh, hands down. Yeah,
I agree. And it definitely made it in my top 250, absolutely. Yeah. And I'll continue to keep updated with my rankings.
Probably in my top 10 all-time movies.
Honestly?
My number one all-time movie,
I think we've shared our number ones before.
Yeah, my number one movie is not going to be is not in the IMDb top 250, so we might not ever cover it. But
We can.
Steve
It's our
Martin's The
podcast.
Jerk.
It's our podcast.
It's just the best movie ever made.
Okay, maybe we do a month where we do non-top 250 movies.
There we go. Yeah,
So-
I know that there's a handful of movies not in the top 250, but that people have asked that we cover.
Okay. Yeah, again, continue to reach out to us on social medias. Again, we're starting out with this, and we're live now. And we want to interact with our listeners.
And we're recording this about a month before it's going to air. But we are
Shortening that gap.
Shortening that gap more and more, and we're hoping to get to a point where our episodes are recorded very shortly before they're published, because we want to be able to more closely interact with
Right.
you guys, and we can't really do that if we leave too much of a gap.
We had to create a system for ourselves, though. And we had to realize find our flow. So yeah. So, but thank you for listening. This was a great episode. I'm very happy with all of this.
Yeah. Join us in 2 weeks when we cover our first animated movie.
And the first movie that I've seen before going into the podcast. All these other ones I'd never seen going into the podcast.
Yeah,
this is the first one I've seen multiple times.
This one I've seen multiple times.
Yeah.
Inside Out.
Pixar,
Inside Out.
Disney. Yes.
Before we get going here, is this a movie that you like?
Inside Out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I don't.
Just a little heads up. Yeah,
I do not.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I like it, and we'll get into that later.
Yeah, and then I'm looking forward to seeing how Inside Out reminds us of A Clockwork Orange. All right, thank you so much. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Have a good one. Thanks for listening. We had a great time putting this together for you.
To join the conversation, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Silver Screen Biases.
And on Twitter at Screen Biases.
We believe in value for value, so if you found value in our show, we ask you to consider supporting us.
Links to our social media and support can be found in the show notes.